If you've been calling yourself lazy lately, there's a chance you're misreading what's actually happening inside your mind. You sit down to start something important, a project, a workout, a difficult email, and instead of moving, you scroll, you stall, you reorganize your desk. You promise you'll feel more ready tomorrow. On the surface, it looks like procrastination. It feels like a character flaw. But psychology often suggests that what looks like laziness can sometimes be cognitive friction, an invisible mental resistance that shows up when something feels emotionally complex, uncertain, or identity-threatening. And if you're someone who thinks deeply, who wants to do things well, who quietly puts pressure on yourself to get it right, that friction can feel heavier than it looks from the outside. Society tends to frame productivity as a simple equation: discipline equals output. If you're not producing, you must not be trying. But that equation ignores internal processing. It ignores hesitation rooted in overanalysis. It ignores the mental load of wanting your effort to matter. For many adults between 18 and 45, especially in high expectation environments, the issue isn't a lack of ambition. It's a surplus of internal dialogue. You're not avoiding the task because you don't care. You might be avoiding it because you care so much that starting feels risky. What if it's not good enough? What if it exposes a gap between who you are and who you think you should be? Psychology sometimes refers to this as evaluation, sensitivity, a heightened awareness of potential judgment, whether from others or from yourself. When evaluation feels high stakes, the brain can hesitate. Not out of laziness, out of protection. And the more intelligent or self-aware you are, the more scenarios you can imagine. Every possible outcome, every possible flaw. That mental simulation can be exhausting before you even begin. So you delay. Not because you lack drive, but because your internal system is trying to calculate too many variables at once. If this feels familiar, consider the possibility that you're not stuck because you're incapable. You may be stuck because your mind is overengaged, not underengaged. And that distinction changes. What often gets mistaken for laziness is actually a pattern. Psychology sometimes calls cognitive overload. When your mind is juggling too many open loops, unfinished goals, unanswered messages, unresolved decisions, future plans, it can quietly stall. Not because you don't want progress, but because your internal dashboard is crowded. Imagine opening 10 browser tabs at once and trying to focus on just one. Even if each tab is important, the sheer volume creates friction. Many thoughtful, high-responsibility adults live in that mental state more often than they realize. You're thinking about your career trajectory while responding to texts. You're comparing your current life stage to where you thought you'd be. You're replaying a conversation from yesterday while planning for next week. That's not laziness. That's sustained cognitive engagement. And sustained engagement without clear closure can lead to what researchers sometimes describe as task paralysis, a temporary difficulty initiating action when the mind perceives complexity or ambiguity. There's also something called identity pressure. Between 18 and 45, people are often building, rebuilding, or redefining who they are. You might feel pressure to be successful, interesting, financially stable, emotionally mature, physically healthy, all at once. Each goal carries its own standards. When standards stack up, starting can feel heavier because every action feels symbolic. It's no longer just sending an email. It's proving I'm competent. It's no longer just going to the gym. It's proving I have discipline. When ordinary tasks become tied to self-worth, hesitation can increase. Your mind may subtly resist because the emotional stakes feel inflated. Psychology suggests that when the perceived stakes are high, the brain can default to avoidance to reduce short-term stress. That avoidance is protective, not defective. It's an attempt to manage perceived pressure. For reflective personalities, this can be even stronger. You don't just act, you evaluate your actions. You don't just start, you question the long-term implications. That depth is valuable. But depth without self-compassion can turn into gridlock. If you've been frustrated with yourself for not doing enough, it may be worth considering that your mind hasn't been idle. It's been processing, forecasting, calculating, and sometimes processing. So much information makes movement feel heavier than it appears from the outside. There's another layer to feeling mentally stuck that doesn't get talked about enough. emotional weight disguised as indifference. Sometimes you tell yourself you just don't feel like it. But underneath that neutrality can be quiet discouragement, subtle disappointment, or accumulated self-doubt. Psychology often suggests that when effort hasn't led to the results you expected, motivation can dip, not dramatically, but gradually. You try, you adjust, you try again, and the payoff feels inconsistent. Over time, your system may conserve energy. It's not that you've stopped caring. It's that part of you is tired of investing without guaranteed return. This can show up as low-grade avoidance. You delay starting not because you're lazy, but because you're protecting yourself from another perceived letdown. There's also the concept of decision fatigue. Modern adult life requires constant choice-making. What to prioritize, what to ignore, what opportunity to take, what boundary to set. Each decision consumes cognitive resources. By the time you sit down to work on something meaningful, your mental energy may already be partially spent. And when energy feels low, even simple steps can feel disproportionately heavy. For introspective individuals, another dynamic can intensify this. Over-identification with potential outcomes. Instead of seeing a task as a neutral activity, you see it as a referendum on your future. A small mistake feels like evidence. A delay feels like confirmation. This isn't irrational. It's human pattern recognition working over time. But when every action feels tied to your identity, forward movement can feel intimidating. Psychology suggests that when identity and performance become tightly fused, hesitation increases because the emotional cost of imperfection feels higher. And yet, none of this points to a flaw in your character. In many cases, it reflects awareness. You understand consequences. You understand nuance. You think long-term. That depth can create temporary immobility when clarity feels incomplete. Feeling mentally stuck doesn't mean you lack discipline. It can mean your internal standards are high, your self-observation is quiet truth, and your emotional investment is real. You're in a From the outside, it might look like you're not moving. Fully integrated From the inside, psychology sometimes describes growth not as a straight line, but as cycles of expansion and recalibration. You absorb new experiences, new expectations, new comparisons, and before visible progress happens, there's an internal reorganization phase. From the outside, that phase can look like stagnation. From the inside, it can feel like fog. You want clarity before you act. You want certainty before you commit. You want momentum without regret. And when those conditions aren't perfectly aligned, you pause. Not because you're incapable, but because your mind is attempting to update its internal map. For thoughtful adults navigating careers, relationships, and self-definition, these pauses can happen more often than anyone admits. Society celebrates constant output, but rarely acknowledges cognitive integration. You are allowed to have seasons where your internal system is recalculating. That recalculation can feel like heaviness, like resistance, like, I should be further by now. But should is often a comparison tool, not an objective measure. You are not broken for needing clarity. You are not defective for hesitating when something feels meaningful. In fact, hesitation can signal that you understand the weight of your choices. There's depth in that. There's responsibility in that. And there's humanity in that. At a philosophical level, what feels like stuckness can sometimes be awareness outgrowing old motivations. The goals that once energized you may no longer align the same way. The identity you built 5 years ago may not fit perfectly now. When alignment shifts, momentum can temporarily stall. Not as a punishment, but as an invitation to recalibrate. You don't have to label yourself lazy to explain that pause. You can recognize it as a sign that something internally is adjusting. And adjustment takes quiet time. So if this resonates, maybe the more accurate statement isn't, I'm lazy. Maybe it's, I'm processing. Maybe it's, I'm integrating. Maybe it's, I care enough that I don't want to move blindly. Sit with that possibility. If this perspective helped you see yourself with a little more clarity and a little less self-criticism, you might find value in exploring more conversations like this, reflections that treat your inner world with nuance instead of judgment.